have never been what you might call an optimist. I'm not saying I'm a pessimist, no. I have rightfully been accused of being very realistic. I think of myself as a realistic person. I want to see the world for the way it really is. I have not been an optimist since I was a kid. I think maybe it's actually inborn, and maybe it's a generational thing. I am one of the much maligned millennials. Reams of internet paper have been spent on how disappointing we are as a generation. We have such a dark world view. We're confusing. We're not buying houses. We're not getting married. We're not having as many kids or any kids. Oh, they're such pessimists. But can you blame us? We're not kids, actually, anymore. Millennials are those born between 1981 and 1996, which means the oldest of us is pushing 40, and the youngest are thoroughly in their 20s. We came of age in the pall of 9/11. As kids and teens, we saw terror threat level as a thing, and it's red. You know, now you have to take your shoes off at the airport. As kids, we watched our neighborhoods fill with for sale and foreclosed signs when the housing bubble burst. And most of us entered the job market during or just after the Great Recession hit. So, you know, that was great timing. I graduated from college 10 years ago with a bachelor's degree in my hand, and I cobbled together a bunch of little part-time jobs. And I worked retail 6 days a week so that I had the ability to move home with my parents, as did all my friends. Oh, we applied for jobs. I hate that millennials are lazy thing. We applied for jobs. We were told, oh, you're such a great candidate for this position, but we have folks with a master's degree and 10 years of experience who are applying for this entry-level job, so can you really blame us for being kind of dark? And now, it's the kicker, just as we've had a period of relative calm, relative stability in our lives to establish our careers, save some money, start our families, it all comes crashing down again. I have lost count how many of my friends, how many congregants my age have lost jobs since the pandemic hit, have had to delay their weddings, have had to delay having kids, who've had to delay fertility treatments because of this pandemic. And if you think the stuff they write about millennials is dour, you should see the stuff they write about Gen Z. Oh, yeah. Oh, millennials are so negative and Gen Z are nihilist. That means they think you don't care about anything. There's a lot of Gen Zers in the room right now. All born between 1996 and 2010-ish. It's all, oh, social media is all they care about, and all they want to do is the TikTok and stuff like that. It's all over the internet. But can you blame them? The oldest among them are entering the job market, and honey, that market is closed to them right now. And the majority of them are going into high school or starting college. Well, they're supposed to be starting college. But how many of them left with the car, you know, packed to the brim, you can't see out the back window, gonna go decorate their new dorm room, to be sent home 2 weeks later because there was an outbreak? You know, at least my prom wasn't canceled. I got to walk my high school graduation. I got to walk my college graduation, and I never had to go to online school, but it sounds terrible from what I've heard. And it's huge, the effects of this upheaval on young lives. A friend of mine posted recently, "When I feel my patience running low with the 6-year-old lately, which is often these days," she wrote about her own kid, "I try to remember that one day in March, without warning, we picked him up from school and he never saw his friends again. And even most adults would lack the tools to be able to process that." For so many of these Gen Z kids, elementary school kids, high school kids, college kids, their world has been turned upside down for the first time. So can you blame them for wanting to record themselves dancing or wanting to text their friends all the time. If I had a cell phone when I was a teenager that was not a brick, I'm pretty sure I would do the same thing. Oh, millennials, they're so dark and negative, and Gen Z totally don't care. Yeah, well, the two of us look at the world, and we see a global pandemic, and the job market roiling, and climbing inflation of the basic necessities of life. And it's not just the wealth disparity issues that get to us, because pre-pandemic, there were huge human rights disparities. It is still not safe to be every gender, to be every race. It's still not safe to be every religion or every sexuality. So, yeah, we may not be optimists, and yeah, it might be a generational thing. But when you've spent a good chunk of your childhood and your formative teenage years and your entire adult life being continually smacked in the face with just how awful the world is, how can you be an optimist? I've always thought of optimism as seeing the world for what it is not, as a shiny, sparkly, wonderful place, and that just seems foolish to me. Seems like you're setting yourself up for disappointment, because we know that it has problems. And no matter how young or old you are, we all know, it's got problems. And right now, it's got big problems. So what can we say to millennials who are having the rug pulled out from our feet again? To Gen Z who haven't even had to wrestle with the rules changing because they have literally always grown up in a world where they have had fear and anxiety and low expectations for people. And it's not just us young people who are feeling this pull, this drag downward. Study after study proves that to be true. Pessimism has a growing specter for all ages right now. What do we say to those in Gen X who are worrying after their own children, who are teenagers, so many of them, trying to launch into a world that's so different from the one that they launched into? And at the same time, they have older parents who are trying to make it through a time when we have a plague that is incredibly fatal to those over 65. They've got both those going on. And what do we say to the baby boomers, many of whom planned to retire soon, and many of whom who are watching their savings just slip away? What do you say to the baby boomers who can't even hold their grandchildren? Or to the silent generation that are still with us who can't hold their great-grandchildren? That is a pain I cannot imagine. But I hear it in my parents' voices and my in-laws' voices when we talk to them. And what do we say to the generation after Gen Z, to the babies and toddlers and small children of now, who haven't been saddled with a title for their generation yet? I'm sure it's coming. What do I say one day to my 1.5-year-old son? Because this is not the world I wanted him to grow up in. And it breaks my heart that he has to. I think we have to say, be an optimist. But I also think we need a radically different perspective on what that optimism means. Because I think that optimism can be an audacious form of rebellion. I used to think that optimism meant being happy all the time, refusing to be sad or frustrated or disappointed, just deciding, poof, I'm going to be happy with the world. And that never made sense to me, because you can't choose how you feel how you feel. But Being optimistic doesn't mean feeling happy. You can be optimistic and not feel happy or content. I actually think that's the key to being optimistic. Being optimistic doesn't mean saying, it'll be okay, it'll be taken care of later. No. We cannot exempt ourselves for how things turn out in the future. Being optimistic means saying, I reject the notion, I refuse to believe that just because the world is upside down and inside out and literally on fire right now, that it must always be that way. I know that that is not so. I know it will be better. And I know that the only way that that is possible, that anything will ever be better, is if I myself do something about it. Optimism is rebellion against the status quo. When we say be optimistic, we should mean set expectations of greatness. Look at what the world could be. And is that what it is? No, of course not. But that fact that it's not that right now, that cannot be a deterrent. We have to set the bar incredibly high for what we can achieve, so we know what we're aiming for, so we know what to try. Judaism teaches that the world started out as paradise. Eve, Adam, Garden of Eden, and it was perfection. And they got booted. They got booted from the garden. And how could they not just lay down and give up after that? After they got booted? Because they knew what paradise was. They knew perfection. They lived in it. And after they got booted, they had to look down the long barrel of their lives, and they were told by God, life is going to be pain, and life is going to be suffering. So it would be reasonable for them to say, forget it. There's no point. I know what perfect was, I lived in it, and I know my experience going forward will not be like that. But they don't give up. They work hard despite that. They suffer, yes, and they live. There is a reason we are presented with paradise first in the Jewish telling of creation. Because afterwards, when we are forced to live in the real world, and things are incredibly difficult, we know things can be better. We know things will be better. They need to be better. So we have to keep that ideal in our mind so we know what to shoot for. We have to be idealists, which is not a natural state for myself. I am not an idealist kind of person. I'm not, as I said, an optimist, not naturally inclined that way, but I think we have to try it out. And not everything will be better all at once. Optimism is not the same thing as utopianism. It means believing that there will be some good. There will be more good, and we can make it so for the future. And when you look at life from that perspective, when things will be better one day, that allows us to say, at least some things will be better one day. And that enables us to look at our lives even now and say, hey, not everything is bad. There is some good. There's some really good stuff in here right now. And that is heartening. And it brings light when it's so dark outside. On Yom Kippur, you've heard us say in here how many times? We say, Gamar Hatima Tova. May you be signed and sealed for a good year. And you have to be an optimist to say that. If you don't think it can actually happen, if you don't think we will have a good year, if you don't think things will be, or even can be, much better, either we're lying when we say Gamar Hatima Tova, or we are saying words we do not mean. And both of those are particularly egregious on Yom Kippur. So it must be true somehow to wish a good year to each other wholeheartedly. I was talking to a friend of mine, a fellow rabbi, a fellow millennial rabbi, about this. And he asked me, Sarah, when do we celebrate Rosh Chodesh? That's the new Jewish month, and it coincides with the new moon. What, he asked me, does the moon look like when we say the blessings and celebrate the new Jewish month? And I said, trick question. It doesn't look like anything because there isn't one, which is true. Rosh Chodesh is celebrated when the moon is new, that is, when the sky is filled with only darkness. Now, you'd think we would celebrate when the moon is at its fullest, radiant at the night sky. But we don't. We celebrate when the moon is completely invisible, and all that is there is potential. This Yom Kippur, as we think of the ways that we endeavor to better ourselves in the coming year, for myself, I am on a mission, and I invite you to try too if it is something that is a new concept to you as it is for myself. I am going to try to be an optimist, an idealist even, because I refuse to believe that just because things look bad now, and they do, and just because they might be worse in the future, and I think that's quite possible, I cannot accept that these things will always be so. I reject that notion, and I will use my God-given abilities and strength and love to do what I can to make this world as close to paradise for all living creatures as possible. With 100% conviction, allow me to wish you a Gemar Hatima Tova. May you all be signed and sealed for good.